Good evening again, everybody. My kids are off being very quiet right now, so I'm a little earlier than usual on my chapters. I'm going to read chapter 4 today of the Earl on the Train. Chapter 4, Carpe Diem. Ida crumpled the telegram in her fist. How dare he? How dare he rebuke her as if she were a little child? After all the money she had spent to send a lengthy and informative telegram, this was his response? Demanding, demeaning, obnoxious. She uncurled her fingers and smoothed out the paper, looking over the note a second time. Do not come here, A. As if she were in the wrong. As if it hadn't been his broken promise that had forced her to this. Ida could feel the indignant heat in her cheeks. She turned red at the slightest provocation. She took a calming breath and poured another cup of tea. Folding the telegram carefully, she tucked it into the small purse tied at her hip. She wouldn't let him get the better of her. She would press on. Her future depended on it. Tomorrow she would send another message, a shorter one, just long enough to convey her resolve. Today, though, was for her pleasure, and she wouldn't let him ruin it with his high-handed response. Today she would soak up the sights and sounds and smells of Paris, fill her soul with them, and create memories to treasure for a lifetime. Or she would if Mr. Masterson ever decided to show up. He had promised to eat breakfast with her, but she had already eaten and finished most of her pot of tea, and he hadn't even so much as sent a note. His hotel, several steps up from her own modest lodgings, wasn't especially far away. A few minutes by foot at most. Perhaps he had changed his mind and deserted her. All morning she'd been sitting in the dining room watching the other guests come and go. Was she a fool to wait? She sipped her tea and flipped through her Baedeker's guide, reviewing her marked pages. Perfumes listed were well chosen, in her opinion. 5 of them were on her agenda for today, and another 3 tomorrow. The weather this morning was fair, so time strolling outdoors would suit her, and hopefully the evening would afford her the opportunity to take in a show. Opera was beyond her budget, but the guide said that Paris had more than 40 theaters. The true difficulty would be in choosing among so many. Morning! Ida's head snapped up at the sound of the voice that was familiar and yet not. An odd, cheery transformation of the low growl she had come to associate with Nick Masterson. Morning to you, she stammered. Their eyes met, and he flashed a smile at her. His amber eyes were warm today, almost liquid, with a hint of a sparkle. Her tea sloshed in her suddenly unsteady hand. Goodness, was he handsome when he smiled. A small tilt of his mouth, and he was 5 times finer than when he scowled. Which was quite something for a man who possessed the loveliest scowl she'd come across in all her 23 years. He appeared well rested. Perhaps that was the reason for his sudden good cheer, as well as his tardiness. Masterson slid into the seat beside her, though the table was otherwise unoccupied, putting his large frame scandalously close to her. This was Paris, she reminded herself. Here, unmarried and unchaperoned men and women could dine together and whisper intimacies across the table, with little fear of the word reaching their respectable families back home. Not that she intended intimacies of any sort with the stranger she'd just met. Certainly not. Mr. Masterson flicked a wrist at the nearest waiter in what appeared to be a gesture. The man scurried over to take his order. Bring me whatever the chef says is best today. A strong pot of coffee and more tea for the lady. Oui, monsieur. Merci. Masterson glanced at Ida. Do you need anything further? It appears as though you have already eaten. Nothing further, thank you. When the waiter dashed off to do his bidding, she added, Of course I have already eaten. It's 10:30. Yes, a civilized time to rise, if I do say so myself. I was up at 8. Were you? Dashed peculiar. What is peculiar, Mr. Masterson, is you're keeping the hours of an idle gentleman. I thought you said you were in town on business. He chuckled. My business is rather peculiar, in fact. Oh? She leaned closer. Tell me more. He inhaled deeply, closing his eyes for a moment. You are fruity again this morning. Blackcurrant today? With notes of citrus and something floral. Lovely. Ida straightened before his nearness could cause her to flush again. You have an excellent nose, Mr. Masterson. I'm something of a potions specialist. Not making them, mind you, but studying them. Small differences in taste and smell can signal large differences in effect, and I've trained myself to recognize such things. Excellent. I imagine you will enjoy our stops at perfumeries, then. She pushed her guidebook toward him. If you would take a look at the pages I have marked and use your knowledge of the city to plan an efficient route for today's sightseeing, I would like to get through as many things as possible. One dark eyebrow arched. I believe I'm beginning to understand you. Just as you pack as many words as possible into every conversation, you fill your day with as many activities as you can. I imagine this is your definition of leisure. She fought a frown, not certain if he was mocking her. And what is your definition? If I should ever find myself at leisure, I will let you know. Oh, you prefer to keep busy, then? It's a necessity. I'm easily bored. Ask anyone in my family. I don't know your family. The scandalous reality of their friendship hit Ida so suddenly that she flinched. She knew next to nothing about this man. Only his name, his discerning nose, and his predisposition for seasickness. For all she knew, he had a wife and children back home, or enormous gaming debts. He could even be a criminal fleeing justice. Nor do I know yours. Aside from your knowledge of perfumes, you've told me very little about yourself. True. Perhaps that's the natural way of things when two people meet on a train. Our lives intersect for a time in the course of our travels, but our pasts are behind us, and our futures will diverge when our routes do. It is a fleeting relationship, but I hope a worthwhile one. He stroked his jaw, which was clean of stubble this morning. An interesting observation. Shall we agree, then, not to dwell on where we come from, or where we are going, but simply to enjoy what time we have? Yes, let's. She extended her hand, and he clasped it to seal their agreement. The warmth of his palm started a tingle running up her arm. Their eyes locked, and the handshake lingered. Her breath caught in her throat. He had to be a rogue with half a dozen mistresses, a seducer hopping across the channel to avoid the angry fathers of his illicit paramours, a scoundrel for certain. Everyone else on the train to Dover had known to keep away from him. Ida withdrew her hand, her skin burning where he had touched her. No pasts, no questions, only now. She waved a hand at her guidebook. So, Mr. Masterson, where shall we go first? And that was Chapter 4.